These books literally altered my brain chemistry and changed me forever. 7 Days in June by Tia Williams is one of my favorite romance novels of all time that I have ever read. This is a second chance romance and it's got incredible representation, black representation and also disability representation. It was so raw, so real, so beautiful. Like, I feel like these characters, Eva Mercy and Shane Hall, actually exist. They're both basically writers who have a really intense history. They've known each other since they were teenagers, studying at the same school, and they kind of connected in a really powerful way back then because they were both really troubled, from troubled family backgrounds, and they just understood each other in a way that nobody else around them did. And for whatever reason, they lost contact over the years. And so they haven't seen or spoken to each other in the longest time, and they both end up being at the same literary event. And the way they reconnect and the way the chemistry like fizzles and sizzles and sparkles and this is what I look for from romance. It's got meaning, it's got heart and depth, and just a little touch of spice. It is hot, and the chemistry definitely leaps off the page. So I highly recommend this if you like romance books. Babel by R.F. Kuang is a masterpiece. This novel is perhaps the most lyrical, thought-provoking, and powerful pieces of fiction that I've ever read in my entire life. I was hooked. This novel is basically a historical fantasy. It's the story of Robin Swift, who is taken from China, from Canton, by Richard Lavelle, who is a professor at Oxford. He's a celebrated professor, he's very well respected, and Robin Swift is raised by this professor in a very sort of sinister way. He takes him in and he raises him and trains him to be really intelligent and sharp, and the whole premise is that he is raised for the British Empire. I don't think I mentioned this is set in the 1800s. So it's all about colonialism and language and power. And even the fantasy system really feeds into this whole narrative. It almost felt like Kuang came up with the fantasy system in order to really prove her point about colonialism. I mean, it's very intelligent. There's so many layers to this. There's so much depth. It's stunning. For those of you who do not know this, I'm actually an Oxford graduate, and this completely changed the way that I envision and even remember Oxford. It's wild. Like, I thought this was, it sinks into your brain and it never leaves. Oxford is forever changed for me because of this book. Just read it. Just do yourself a favor. If there's one book you read in 2024, let it be this one. Sally Rooney wrote this with the aim of having us all stare into space and feel empty. And yet still come back for more. Because I went out and what did I do? I bought her other books. She is a genius. The way she is able to really pinpoint the intricacies and complexities of modern relationships and just moments in the modern world that we would have, that I have never seen any other writer put into words so simply, because her prose is really quite simple but so powerful, so elegant, and almost cutthroat. Like, she will so simply just come in and say it like it is, and that's it. It's like mind is blown. This is the story of Marianne and Connell. They grew up in west of Ireland, yeah. Just trying to get the part of Ireland right. I know when they're older they go to Dublin and they do university there, but in the beginning of the novel they are at the same school in the west of Ireland, and there's a lot of complexities in their setup. So he's very popular at school and she's kind of a loser, a nobody really wants to associate with her, and the class background is kind of a flip on that, because he's from a working class background and his mum is a cleaner at Marianne's house, which is like a mansion, and she's she's basically from a very wealthy family. And so they get closer because of that dynamic, because, you know, he will come to pick his mum up from her house, and then they will basically, it's the start of an interesting and intense love affair that just will make you feel every single human emotion imaginable. Circe by Madeline Miller is a breathtaking modern retelling of the story of Circe, who appears in the Odyssey as a very sort of conniving, deceitful, and strange female character. She's a goddess, but she's described as having like human speech and features. And I mean, the way Madeline Miller turns everything round on its head with the most elegant feminist spin, and it just makes Circe's story so empowering and rich and stunning. Like her astute observations of human emotion and struggles and thoughts and perceptions. It was just a journey. I felt so deeply connected to Circe. I mean, it's Greek mythology, it's fantasy, but it felt real. Everything just felt so real to me. And I think it's because Madeline Miller's writing really gets into the depth of human emotion, into the sort of the loneliness, the despair, the regret, the lust, and even like motherhood was described with such intricacy and beauty. I'm not really into Greek mythology very much, but this was highly recommended to me, and I can see exactly why. This deserves all the stars. This has all my stars. Madeline Miller is literally after my heart. Iron Widow by Zirin J. Zhao felt like the biggest FU to the world that I have ever read. This YA fantasy novel slash sci-fi novel was like absolutely like such a thrilling page turner, so intense. The female rage was pouring from every single page. This novel is set in a futuristic world that has basically been invaded by these robot aliens, and so humans have had to adapt. They basically sit inside these massive robots that they run using their spirit pressure, or like spirit power. That's the magical system. It's like when you're sitting inside the robot, there are needles that will go into your spine, and then you're able to control it. You basically become the robot. And there's so many cool robot shapes and figures, like they've got fox, a dragon, a bird. So I thought it was a really unique and creative magical system, and I really enjoyed that. I don't usually enjoy reading about robots, but I loved it. I was so here for it. The only thing is, in this magical system, there is just, it's deeply entrenched in the patriarchy, and there is a lot of inequality. So girls are expected to just give themselves up as concubines to the male pilots who actually run, like, who actually use the chrysalises, the robots. So the female co-pilots are basically just there to get their spirit pressure sucked out of them, and then most of them die right after the battle has ended, and the male pilot stops using the robot, the chrysalises. They're called the chrysalises, I think, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So yeah, it's quite a complex system, but it was just, there was so much rage. I felt so angry while reading this, because you see just the extent of the patriarchy. And there were other cultural references to foot binding. The main character, Rose Etienne, she has undergone that, and so she does need like a walking stick to walk sometimes, and walking is just very difficult and very painful for her. So there is that representation as well. I thought this was an incredibly powerful book, and it just made me feel so much. I was turning the pages of this well into the night. I could not let it go, and I'm so excited to read the second part. I believe that's coming out soon. The Mismatch by Sarah Jafari is so tender and raw and romantic and real. These characters, Soraya and Magnus, literally feel like real people to me that must exist somewhere in London. They were just so fleshed out, and they were so full of flaws and angst and lust and confusion and worry. Oh my god, it was, I will forever carry this love story with me in my heart. Like, it wasn't easy to read. I mean, there is reference to abuse, there is reference to you know, Muslim guilt, something that I felt as well. You know, when you're doing things differently to how your family or your community expects, and just trying to figure yourself out, where there are so many labels being slapped on you, and there are so many people surrounding you that have expectations that don't align with what you want for yourself. I just thought this novel was brilliant and so needed. Magnus and Soraya are basically university students. This is more of like a new adult romance novel, I would say. They are in their early 20s. They're really just trying to figure themselves out as fresh graduates, and it's a situation where Soraya, being from a British Iranian household, has so many different expectations. Her family's really strict, so she's not allowed to do any of the things that her brother's been allowed to do, like date or you know, go out late or wear what she wants to wear. So she's from that really strict conservative family background, and she kind of starts to break out of that when she goes to university. And on the other hand, we have Magnus, who is kind of the opposite. He's very outspoken, he's very popular at university, he's dated a lot of girls, he's known to be a total player, he's just got that very laddish vibe about him, but he's also really intelligent and quite deep. And Soraya taps into the part of him that he doesn't allow anyone else at university to see, that, you know, he's really into literature, he wants to be a writer, and there's just so much there. And I don't want to give too much away because it does sort of unveil itself as the narrative progresses. But Soraya really comes into herself as she begins to date Magnus. There's a lot of religious and cultural differences, but you see, as their walls come down and they really try to come together and understand each other, that the most beautiful love story starts to unravel. I feel like this is amazing British Iranian Muslim representation. It just felt so raw, so honest, and this is one of my favorite love stories I've ever read. Highly recommend. I'm just not the same. I think about these characters all the time. Randomly they'll pop into my head and I'm just like, oh. Those are all the recent reads that have really stuck with me and made me think, or made me just feel something. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please do leave a comment, let me know your thoughts, what you've been reading, what kind of books you enjoy, and if there are any recommendations. I love that. I'm always up for some great book recommendations, so I look forward to interacting with you in the comments.